Ever since Usain Bolt retired, the entire sport of track and field has been waiting for one thing: the next Bolt. Every few years, a fast teenager shows up and gets the label, and every few years that teenager fades. But right now, there is an 18-year-old from Australia who the whole world is calling the next Usain Bolt, and this time it is different. Because this time, Bolt himself has noticed. And by some measurements, this kid is already running faster than Bolt was at the same age. His name is Gout Gout, and what he is doing to the record books is the kind of thing that makes you stop and wonder if you are watching the start of the next great era in sprinting. Let me start with who he actually is, because the story is remarkable before he even steps on a track. Gout Gout is an Australian teenager whose family came from South Sudan. He grew up far from the traditional sprinting superpowers of the United States and Jamaica, in a country that, frankly, has spent decades being a punchline in the 100 and 200 meters. Australia is not where you expect the heir to Usain Bolt to come from. And yet here he is, with a running style so smooth and so familiar that the first time most people saw footage of him, they did a double take. The long stride, the upright posture, the way he seems to glide while everyone around him is straining. It looks like Bolt? That is not an exaggeration invented by the internet. It is the first thing nearly everyone says, but a resemblance is not a record. So let us talk about what he has actually done. Go back to December 2024. At the Australian All-Schools Championships, a 16-year-old Gout Gout ran the 200 meters in 20.04 seconds. That time broke a record that had stood for 56 years. The previous mark, 20.06, had belonged to Peter Norman, an Australian legend, set all the way back at the 1968 Mexico City Olympics. Think about that timeline. A record set in 1968 that survived every Australian sprinter for over half a century, through generations of athletes who came and went without ever touching it, was broken by a teenager who was not even old enough to drive. A 5-6-year-old national record, gone, run by a kid in a school championship. And he did not stop there. He kept getting faster. By 2025, he was running a wind-assisted 9.99 inches, the 100 meters, going under 10 seconds as a teenager. Even if the wind was over the legal limit that day, he set an area record of 20.02 inches, the 200 on the international circuit. He traveled to Europe for his first senior-level competition at just 17 and broke his own Australian record there. He lined up at a senior world championships against grown men, while most kids his age were finishing high school. Every single time he raced, the times came down and the legend grew. Then came the run that made the rest of the world pay full attention. At the 2026 Australian Championships, in the 200-meter final, with the eyes of an entire nation on him, Gout Gout ran 19.67 seconds, a new Australian national record, and a time that announced he was no longer just a promising teenager. He was a genuine world-class sprinter. Now, I want to be precise here, because precision matters. 19.67 is the Australian national record. It is not the world record. The world record in the 200 meters still belongs to Usain Bolt, at an almost mythical 19.19. Set in Berlin in 2009, a number that has not been seriously threatened in over 15 years. So no, Gout Gout has not broken Bolt's world record, and anyone telling you otherwise is selling you a headline. But here is what makes 19.67 so significant, and it is the detail that the comparison to Bolt actually rests on. It is about age. The most honest way to compare two athletes from different eras is to line them up at the same age and see who was faster. And when analysts have done exactly that, the results are startling. By several of those age-for-age comparisons, Gout Gout at 18 is running times that are right alongside, and by some measures, even ahead of, where Usain Bolt was at the very same age. The same Usain Bolt who would go on to run 19.19 and become the greatest sprinter who has ever lived. That is the entire reason this comparison is not just hype. It is not that Gout looks like Bolt. It is that the stopwatch, the most objective judge in the sport, is putting him on the same trajectory. Before I tell you what Bolt himself said, drop it in the comments. And 18-year-old already running ahead of Bolt's age-for-age pace? Do you believe the hype, or have we been burned by the next Bolt label too many times? Be honest, because that label has destroyed careers. The history of sprinting is littered with teenagers who got called the next Bolt and then disappeared under the weight of it. The expectation is crushing. The moment you slow down, the same crowd that built you turns on you. So the smart move, normally, is to be skeptical. Except this time, the man whose name is on the label has weighed in himself. Usain Bolt, the 8-time Olympic champion, the world record holder, the man Gout is being compared to, has publicly spoken about him and pointed to him as one of the athletes who could carry the sport forward. When the greatest of all time looks at a teenager and essentially says, "Yes, watch this one," that is not the internet hyping a highlight reel. That is the standard itself, acknowledging the challenger. And it is not just Bolt. Noah Lyles, the reigning face of American sprinting and a multiple world champion, has also taken notice of the Australian kid. When the current king and the all-time king are both watching the same one, 8-year-old, you pay attention. There is a business side that confirms how seriously the sport takes him too. While still a teenager, Gout Gout signed a major deal with Adidas. Sponsorship money at that level does not get handed to a kid for going viral once. It gets handed to athletes that brands believe will define the next decade. The people whose job it is to bet millions on the future of the sport have already placed their bet on him. It is worth understanding how a talent like this even gets discovered in a country with no sprinting pedigree. The story goes that a coach named Di Shepherd spotted Gout running as a young kid and immediately saw something that does not come along in a generation. Not just speed, but the mechanics, the natural fluency, the way the body moved without wasted motion. Great sprinters are often visible early to the trained eye, and the people around Gout knew what they had long before the records started falling. That early guidance matters, because raw teenage speed is fragile. Handled wrong, it burns out or breaks down. Handled right, it becomes what we are watching now. And to understand the weight of the 2026 run, you have to understand the moment. This was not a quiet school meet anymore. At the Australian Championships, the entire country was watching, the expectation was enormous, and a still teenage Gout Gout had to deliver in his home nation, with everyone waiting for him to either prove the hype or crack under it. He did not crack. He ran 19.67, the fastest 200 meters any Australian has ever run, and he did it on the biggest domestic stage of his life. Producing your best when the pressure is at its peak is the single hardest thing to do in this sport, and the fact that a teenager did it tells you something about his temperament that the times alone cannot. He had already tested himself higher than that, too. Gout did not stay in the safe waters of junior racing. He traveled to Europe for senior competition at 17. He lined up at a senior world championships against fully grown elite men, the best on the planet. And according to the analysts who broke it down, he was within striking distance of the kind of athletes who make Olympic finals. Not beating them yet, but close, as a teenager, in territory no Australian sprinter had occupied in living memory. Most kids his age would be overwhelmed just to be in the building. He was racing. That is the part that makes this an Australian phenomenon and not just a track story. Australian sprinting has been, to put it bluntly, a long-running disappointment on the world stage. For decades, the country produced swimmers and rowers and almost nothing in the blue ribbon sprint events. Australians had made peace with the idea that the 100 and 200 belonged to other nations, and then this kid arrives with a South Sudanese family and a Bolt-like stride, and suddenly a country that never had a sprinter to believe in has one who might be the best on earth. That is why he is on the nightly news there, why the stadium goes quiet when he settles into the blocks, why an entire nation has attached its hopes to an 8-year-old, and the comparison to Bolt is not only about the clock, it is about how he looks doing it. Bolt was unique because he was enormous for a sprinter, with a stride so long that he covered the track in fewer steps than anyone else, and a top-end gear that made him look like he was accelerating while everyone else was holding on. Gout has that same quality on film, the long, unhurried stride. The way the gap opens in the back half of the 200, not because he is straining, but because he has another level the others do not. Analysts who have studied the footage frame by frame keep coming back to the same conclusion, that the mechanics are not just fast, they are efficient in the rare way that produces all-time greats. That is why serious people, not just hype accounts, are willing to say his name in the same sentence as the greatest sprinter who ever lived. The gap between 19.67 and Bolt's 19.19 is about half a second. In the 200 meters, half a second is enormous. It represents the difference between a world-class sprinter and the single greatest performance in the history of the event. Closing that gap is not guaranteed. Bolt was a physical freak of nature, 6'5" with a stride nobody could match, and even he only reached 19.19 at the absolute peak of his powers. In his early 20s, in front of a perfect storm of conditions, for Gout Gout to get there, almost everything has to go right. He has to stay healthy through the brutal years of senior competition. He has to keep improving when the easy gains run out. He has to handle the pressure of carrying a nation and an entire sport on his back before he is even old enough to fully understand the weight of it. And that pressure is the real test. The talent is not in question anymore. The times have answered that. What is unknown is whether a teenager can carry the next Bolt label across the next decade without breaking under it. The athletes who survive that label are not always the most gifted. They are the ones who can ignore the noise, trust the people around them, and keep showing up. Gout was spotted young by coaches who saw something special long before the rest of the world did. And the structure around him has tried to protect him, to let him be a teenager while the hype machine roars. Whether that holds up as the stakes climb is the one thing no stopwatch can measure. So, look at where this is heading. The 2028 Olympics are in Los Angeles. Gout Gout would be in his early 20s, right at the edge of the age where sprinters historically peak, the same window in which Bolt ran his fastest times. He will walk into that stadium not as a curiosity, but as a genuine contender. An Australian carrying the hopes of a country that has waited generations for a sprinter like this, and the weight of a sport that has been waiting since 2017 for someone, anyone, to be worthy of the comparison to the greatest ever. The 100 meters, the 200 meters, the events Bolt owned will be waiting. And the number at the top of the mountain, 19.19, will be sitting there exactly where Bolt left it. So bring it all the way back. A kid from a South Sudanese family in Australia, a country nobody associated with elite sprinting, who broke a 5-6-year-old record at 16, who runs with a stride that makes grown fans say his name and Bolt's in the same breath, who is already racing ahead of where the greatest ever was at the same age, and who has been personally acknowledged by Bolt himself. Maybe the label crushes him like it crushed the others. Or maybe, for the first time since 2017, we are actually watching the next one arrive. So tell me in the comments, is Gout Gout the real heir to Usain Bolt? And does he break that 19.19 world record before his career is over? Yes or no, drop it below, and subscribe so you are here for every race, because if the hype is real this time, you are going to want to say you saw it from the beginning.